Well, it's no StarCraft, that's for sure. I had and still do have high hopes for Stormgate, but it seems that for all of their posturing as the next big RTS brought to us in part by the team that brought us StarCraft, they just haven't been able to deliver. At least not yet. It's not that Stormgate is a bad game, it's not. It's actually pretty fun, at least for an early access RTS. While it is showing promise, I do have some issues that just make it feel a little more unfinished than maybe it really is. Full disclosure, I will be comparing this game a lot to StarCraft, but that's only because the game is literally supposed to be the spiritual successor to StarCraft by the developers themselves, who keep boasting about how they developed StarCraft, so I don't think it's unfair for me to do so. As far as the campaign goes, I didn't really enjoy it, at least not like I did with StarCraft. I personally found it to be a little bit lackluster, but that could be because the story just doesn't really resonate with me like StarCraft did. To me, the plot of StarCraft was a lot more interesting. A human civilization reaching the stars through brute force and finding that they aren't alone, meeting an ancient Protoss armada and a swarm-like Zerg race that they tenuously fight together against, off and on at least. The motivations of the Protoss and the Zerg and Terran were all different enough and deeper than what I have found in the Stormgate lore so far. Of course, there were plot holes, but it at least made sense, even if some disbelief had to be suspended for the sake of gameplay. With Stormgate though, this isn't an issue of suspending disbelief. It just sometimes doesn't make sense. It could also be that I am not really into the whole humans caught between angels and demons, but the Celestials aren't angels, they're an advanced civilization, and the demons are actually demons. Only kind of though, they're actually protectors. I don't know, I just think it wasn't as well thought out as maybe it could have been. To me, if you're going to do humans caught in a war between angels and demons, then just do exactly that, and lean into the whole angels versus demons with humans struggling to find their place in it all. That honestly doesn't sound like a bad idea for an RTS. It feels like Stormgate doesn't know exactly what its lore is or what kind of story it wants to tell us. It's sort of like two people telling us a story at the same time, but they have different ideas about what direction it should take. So one tells us that demons are coming out of the ground, but the angels are coming down to fight them. But then the second storyteller doesn't want them to be angels, so they tell us that they're an advanced species of aliens that happen to look angelic. But the demons are still actually demons, but also not because they're the protectors of stuff. And I'm really simplifying this for the sake of brevity, but only kind of. It really doesn't get a whole lot deeper than that. Instead, they chose to focus a bit more on characters to push the hero's gameplay aspect, which we can't experience yet as it was meant to be because 3v3 isn't out yet, and it won't be until 2025. I also don't really understand that choice, because it's been discussed multiple times by the developers that 3v3 is the primary way that the game is meant to be played. So why launch early access without your flagship game mode? It feels like money might have been getting tight, if I'm being honest, and maybe they just had to get the game out there to start getting some revenue coming in. If that's the case, then I get it. I'm not going to harp too much on the art style, but it is a controversial topic to say the least. I mean, what is this? I can get behind cartoonish graphics, but come on. What is this? Or this? To me, gameplay is first, vibes are second, and art style is a distant third. I don't really care if the game is just pixels as long as the other two criteria are met and it's enjoyable to play. That said, I'd have gone a different direction artistically. A lot of the art just feels unfinished. It honestly feels like somebody made a StarCraft clone in Warcraft 3 map editor and then just used their own custom unit portraits. The unit portraits are really that rough. I am honestly shocked that a game with a budget in the millions didn't have better unit portraits. Even during early access, I have seen better placeholder art for Kickstarter games developed by people with no professional experience to speak of. They really are that bad. And I feel bad saying that because I assume somebody put a lot of work into these, although I kind of hope not. As far as gameplay, it's obviously a bit more polished. Sometimes. And based on my 4090, which is heating my room nicely this summer while playing, I'm not confident it's very well optimized yet. There's really no reason that my GPU is working this hard on a game this graphically dated. And this just isn't the caliber of work I expect from a professional game that costs millions to produce from a seasoned team of developers in 2024. All of this is still subject to change. At least that's the brand of hope I keep selling myself. In 2024, even a small loop for a unit portrait would have been better than the lifeless characters we got. It just breaks immersion a bit, and it's a small thing that makes the game feel really unfinished. Of course, it's early access, so the game is literally unfinished. My biggest complaint that makes the game less enjoyable than StarCraft, though, falls under the vibes category, I guess. There is just something about the game that lacks polish and immersion. It's hard to exactly put my finger on and is likely the amalgamation of several factors, but if I had to pick just one, I think it's the sound. There is something about the unit sounds, voices, and most importantly, the combat that just lacks that oomph that StarCraft had. Combat just doesn't sound right. I think it needs more bass maybe, more tweeters, I don't know speakers. Sounds aside, the game just overall feels really like a we have StarCraft at home version of StarCraft. There really aren't any units that I find that exciting. They're not bad, they're just not unique or interesting. I wish the developers had taken some more risks. The only race that really feels different to me is the Celestial Armada, and I still can't believe they named it that. StarCraft had the Protoss' Golden Armada, and I get that they are leaning into that comparison, but that feels like a huge mistake from my perspective. But compared to the other two races, this one at least feels a lot more like a reimagined Protoss rather than the other two, which feel like basically knockoff Zerg and Terran with some extra twists. Don't get me wrong, Celestial Armada is still definitely just a Protoss knockoff, but the level of innovation for them is a little higher than what we see with the other two. For example, the ability with the Celestial Armada to function relies on a balance of power output, use, and storage. It adds an extra layer of depth to the gameplay that the other two just seem to be missing. Honestly, if the other two shared this layer of imagination, I would probably be making a very different video right now. And I get that the developers were trying to make their own new spiritual successor to StarCraft. But they kind of just remade a worse StarCraft. And before some people argue that they weren't or they didn't, they definitely were, and they definitely did. They build this game as made by StarCraft developers, and then made an RTS with almost the exact same races as StarCraft with similar units, build orders, abilities, and maps. This is absolutely meant to be a direct comparison to StarCraft. All of that said, there are a lot of things that Stormgate got right. They managed to do a few things that StarCraft 3, if it ever comes, could learn from. I like the neutral towers and creeps which force people to use slightly different builds for each map. Resource availability is different depending on the map too, which means in games that you don't get cheesed out in the first few minutes, you will be forced to consider what resources are nearby when deciding what to do and how you want to play. Some strategies just won't work on some maps, or will at least be much harder to pull off. And some maps you just don't have the ability to expand as easily, which forces you to change your strategy. I also really like that the developers have managed to accomplish their goal of keeping the maps less wall-oriented. In StarCraft, a lot of build orders depended on walling off portions of the map or building walls on ramps to force enemies into choke points. This doesn't happen anywhere near as often in Stormgate, and that part is very refreshing. Although, there does seem to be an unintended downside to this, and that is it really forces the game into a death ball mechanic where most of your units are just going to be running at each other in a giant ball. Most of the time, games do devolve into that death ball scenario in both StarCraft and Stormgate, but it feels like it happens a lot faster in Stormgate. I also like that they managed to slow the game down quite a bit. It's not as often that I get defeated or win a match in the first 3 to 5 minutes of the game. In StarCraft, most games didn't last more than 10 minutes, and if they did, it was time to start bracing for some Guardians, battle cruisers, or other heavy units. In Stormgate, that isn't anywhere near as severe. The game has found a way to keep a better tempo in terms of game-ending attacks by giving players some mechanics to fight off those early rushes, even if you didn't hurry and build any fighting units. While that is a net positive thing for people entering the RTS genre, I think it's an overall negative thing from the perspective of seasoned players. The game feels a little slow early on, and you spend a little bit more time just waiting on resources and units to finish building. In StarCraft, the focus was on making sure you were always doing something and keeping your actions per minute high, something the developers of Stormgate really wanted to avoid due to the barriers this placed on competitive play and the fact that it frankly scared off new players who would get tired of cannon rushes and 6 pools before they even knew the game's mechanics. I think Stormgate's real saving grace though, at least I hope, will be the custom games map editor. For me personally, the custom games in Warcraft 3 and StarCraft were always the shining stars that brought to life some of the most fun games I have ever played, as well as spawned entirely new games and genres. I can't wait to see what kind of tools the developers give people to create maps and custom scenarios and the kind of games people come up with for it. Although this video was a bit more critical than I normally would be of a game that just entered into early access, I think that it's rightfully so. The developers set themselves to an extremely high standard by comparing their game to StarCraft and constantly reminding everyone that they brought us StarCraft. If you are going to invite that comparison, then people are going to hold you to that standard. Stormgate isn't bad, and I think it has a lot of room to grow and improve into a game that is worthy of being the spiritual successor to StarCraft. However, it isn't StarCraft. And even though I have a lot of hope that the custom games that come from this will be a lot of fun and that I will surely enjoy many more hours of play from this game, it just isn't StarCraft. And I really do wonder if they can live up to the bar that they have set for themselves. What do you all think though? Is Stormgate anywhere near as good as StarCraft? And if it isn't, does the fact that it's free make up for that? Let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to hit that like button, it really helps my channel, and if you want to stay up to date on gaming news and developments, make sure you subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.